that this is our last brown bag lunch of the year. I wanted it to be super special, and I wanted it to be super happy and uplifting, but that's not the way it turned out. So sorry about that. Okay, I think we have no cards going around, and we have no announcements other than Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy New Year. And everybody have a safe and wonderful holiday. That's kind of our announcements. And you know that there's no brown bag lunch on Tuesday, which is the day before Christmas.
How did the cookie walk go?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you everybody who helped us with the holiday soup supper and the cookie walk, etc., etc. We were down, I think, like 25 people, but I think we made the same amount of money. I don't know. So it went well. One of our many fundraisers, and we did find that we have a lot of competition now. We thought, you know, we were very fortunate because when the UCC Church stopped doing their homemade cookies and candies by the pound that they had done for 25 years, they stopped doing it, and so we kind of picked that up as our fundraiser, and it's been really, really successful. This year, not quite so much because they had a huge one in Preston. And so I'd say to people, did you get your cookies? And oh, well, we already all stocked up because we were at Preston yesterday or whatever. So, you know, there's always competition. So anyway, but thank you everybody. We did well, about the same as we did last year. And good fundraiser for us and a good time to get together and just enjoy each other's company. So, we were going to talk today, at the kind of a last minute program, right? We were going to talk about winters, and especially winters in December, and I thought there must be lots and lots of wonderful historic things that happen throughout the county in the month of December. So I started gathering all the things that happened, and all of a sudden I realized, you know, these are not good things. So I'm going to go through some of the things that did happen, and then hopefully at the end we can all maybe have one or two things to add about something that you remember back in the day or whenever that was just a happy thought, so that we can leave here on a good note today, all right? But a lot of people don't like winter. Winter's my favorite time of the year. That's why I'm surprised at the way this turned out. Anyway, okay. So, I was going to start out by telling you that over 100, and this is well over 100 years ago now, maybe 125 years, an article appeared in the Dubuque Telegraph-Herald, and it was entitled Christmas in the Early Days, written by a former Bellevue resident, and he was the Honorable William Graham. And Graham lived back in the very early days of our state, of our county, and he was very prominent in Iowa political circles, close friend of President U.S. Grant. He held a lot of offices. He was a circuit court judge. He was the Dubuque city attorney, and he was actually mayor of Bellevue from 1856 until 1867. And he then ended up being assistant United States attorney. And he retired in January 1st of 1923 as the oldest practicing attorney in the entire United States. And then he died in November of that same year. But he was really a wonderful, well-known guy. And so he wrote this article for the Telegraph-Herald about the early days, winters in the early days. And the article contained a lot of his remembrances. And he started out by saying, I first came to Iowa and settled in Jackson County in 1856. And there I engaged in the practice of law, removing to Dubuque 10 years later. So he practiced in Jackson County for 10 years. Then he went on to explain that Christmas in the pioneer days hadn't changed very much in the years that went along, except it was a little more primitive maybe, that there weren't gaudily colored Christmas trees, there weren't candies of flashy colors, bright lights, or a profusion of fruits. He said presents were usually of the homemade variety, and they were useful. They represented something more than just sentiment and custom. They were something that people needed, and almost always animated. He told about an experience that he had. It was winter weather in in Iowa in December, and he recalled Bellevue in the winter of 1856. And he said on December 1st, 1856, it was the worst snowstorm that he had seen in his entire life. He left the courtroom in Bellevue about 4 o'clock, and he noticed a steamboat was coming up the river. And by the time he reached his office, which was on the riverbank, the Belfast was just passing by, heading for St. Paul. And I have a picture. This is the Belfast, but I have a feeling, it said 1904, so I have a feeling that the one that he was talking about was a little older than this one. But it was already passing by, heading for St. Paul, and it only got as far as Eagle Point. And then the ice was so thick that it was impossible for it to continue any further, and so it tied up until spring, and it stayed there the whole winter. And this was an interesting occurrence, he said, because the cargo on this ship was mostly apples and potatoes. Well, what happened to the apples and the potatoes? They got frozen, right? And so he, being a lawyer, said that it caused much litigation. So probably there was a lot of business in that for them. So again, we're talking about Bellevue, and one of his friends there was A.G. Kegler. And a lot of you are familiar with this house. This was the Kegler house in Bellevue, and we've talked about it. We've got some really neat history about this house. But A.J. Kegler was a friend of his, and at the time he was a senator, an Iowa senator in Des Moines from Bellevue. And he was a boy at the time living on a farm 8 miles south of Bellevue. And he remembered the winter that was being talked about. And he said that over 30 head of deer had taken refuge in their barnyard and hid among the cattle to escape the wolves. And this was because they had had a blizzard. They had over 2 feet of snow. Afterwards, there was a light rain that fell, and it caused a really hard crust to form over the snow. And as a result of this, it's a known fact that almost all of the deer in Iowa were extinguished by wolves at that time. Yeah. The deer couldn't run, the wolves could go over the top of the ice, and so all the deer almost totally disappeared from Iowa during that hard December in Iowa. So he talked about that for quite a while. Then he said, the 1st of December, the temperature sank below the 0 mark, and it remained there for weeks. Most of the time, it ranged about 20 degrees or below, and his recollection was that it got above the 0 mark just twice in that whole time. And by the way of variety, he said we had a blizzard every week. And in the state of Iowa that year, 200 people froze to death in the state of Iowa. And then he talked about Christmas Day, and this is a happy thing. Talked about Christmas Day that winter, and he knew of a half a dozen or so young fellows that took a party of young ladies to Galena. They went all the way in sleighs on the ice. They were able to go across the Mississippi and up the Cooper River, all on the ice in their sleighs, and that they had a jolly time at Galena as well as on the sleigh ride, though the thermometer on the return showed that the temperature was 20 below 0. Can you imagine enjoying a sleigh ride when it was 20 below 0? Anyway, he talked about things like that. So as I started looking through all of our history books, etc., coming up with things that happened in the winters in December, I found some interesting things, but they weren't necessarily very happy things, which is what I was looking for. So just think back, by the time of the 1879 history, our first history book in Jackson County, 1879, right, there had already been 4 very large fires in Maquoketa. The first one was of the Wilcox and Dean blacksmith shop. It was a wagon shop on East Platte Street, and their wagons burned, all of their tools, the entire building burned, and back then very few people had insurance, so it was a sad time. Sanborn's grocery store was barely saved from the flames of this fire, and several men were severely burned because they were trying to drench the sides of the building with buckets of water, pouring them on as fast as these buckets of water could be handed to them. But we need to remember that back then, buildings were constructed of very light combustible materials, and fire spread rapidly, and fire was the biggest enemy of every small city back then. Even the Goodnow Hotel, so you know where the Goodnow Hotel was, on the corner of Main and Platt Street, that's the area that we're talking about, and the Goodnow Hotel was even in danger at that time. But heroic efforts of the citizens saved it. But this was 1870, and in 1870, we had no fire department. So then the second fire that happened this early on, second fire that happened was in 1873, okay, 3 years later, right? It broke out again in the hayloft of a livery stable that was owned by N.O. Rhodes. He was also a blacksmith. And this was on West Platt Street, just on the other side of Main. So again, several hundred citizens turned out quickly to form bucket brigades, but the fire couldn't be stopped. And all of the frame buildings in that vicinity burned. There was a billiards room, the stable, butcher shop, harness shop, a saloon. And remember that most of the buildings then had living quarters either behind them or above them. So all of this was gone. And they said that this particular fire, the only thing that halted the flames was the fact that in order to get a hold ahead of it, residents literally tore apart the saloon and hauled it off quickly so that there was nothing there for the fire to burn, and that's what stopped the fire from maybe taking out the entire town. 3 years after that, winter, 1876, the fire fiend again visited Maquoketa, broke out in a grocery store, the Henderson grocery store, bakery of Field and Sutherland, and it was believed that that fire could have been extinguished had water been convenient. But there was only enough to keep the flames at bay. Well, hundreds of residents tried to save the contents of the buildings nearby, so once again, the whole town didn't go up. But the history book says that in less than 2 hours from the time it began, 6 buildings were nothing but a mass of smoldering embers. The fourth fire that came to Maquoketa was again 3 years later, 1879. And this began with a row of wooden buildings north of the Opera House on Main Street. So that'd be the corner of Main and Platt to the north, heading toward the Decker Hotel, right? Wooden buildings. The Opera House itself was in danger, and we talked about that at Brown Bag Lunch not too long ago. And the cornices actually caught on fire several times, but each time they managed to put them out and save them. But this time they blamed the fact that they could barely stop this fire because everything was done with cisterns, right? There wasn't a water system. Every business had a cistern, but there were only 2 cisterns on that side, and they were usually not full. So at that time, the thing that saved the town from the fire was that it was a still night with no wind, and a shower came, a downpour that saved the surrounding buildings. So once again, a lot of damage, but we were kind of saved. In 1882, there was another fire, and it destroyed most of the east side of Main Street, the business block known as the Carter and Union blocks. And at that point, the citizens finally demanded, and they got, a municipal water system. So 1882, finally, Maquoketa got a water system. It was 1883 when it was finished, and when that happened, 3 separate fire companies were formed. And so back in the day, there were fire companies were kind of like clubs that guys belonged to. There was a membership fee required and monthly dues, and they trained by competitions with one another, competitions with the fire department in Preston, and the fire department of Miles was well known and big. And it was just a matter of pride. They wanted to be the best. But the funny thing was that if there was a bad fire, and there were 3 fire companies, this is in Maquoketa, there were 3 fire companies, all 3 of them would race to the fire and fight the fire, and only the one that got there first would be paid, because it was all volunteer. So not only was it a matter of pride, but if they wanted to get paid, they had to be the first people there. And so at the other museum, we do have some of the record books that talk about this and which team got there first and what they were paid. 50 cents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 50 cents an hour or something like that for the whole fire team, not just each individual. So it was just kind of it was such a sporadic system that it's no wonder everything didn't burn down. So everybody knows Alfred Hurst, and he had so much credit for the Hurstville lime kilns, for the wonderful business that he started, and that sort of thing. But I think one thing that he deserves credit for, that changed again, sorry. I'm not supposed to see all of that. One thing that he did was he is the man that's responsible for the fact that Maquoketa eventually had a wonderful fire department. He just deserves so much credit for that. He had what was called the Hearst Running Team. That was one of the first groups. And they were located first in a wooden building on the corner of Platt and 2nd Street. And they were known across the whole state as they competed with fire departments from other places for their speed and their prowess. And during the spring and summer, every morning these men met at this building that was north of town, and then they would practice in the field next to it, pulling their hose cart over a 300-yard course. They gave exhibits and they entered contests with other towns. And eventually they became known, the Hearst Running Team that you see here, became known as the Fire Kings Volunteer Fire Department. And they're just kind of legendary in the firefighting business in Maquoketa. And these men, with their own funds, purchased a hand-drawn hose cart that we have out in the building, in the Packey building behind us. Bought that with their own money. Oh, and you see it here. Bought that with their own money. And so they were the first firefighting team. The second one, sorry. Don't know what's going on. The second year, the Barnes Running Team was formed, and they became the Barn Hose Volunteer Fire Company, and they were located on Olive Street. And then the third was the Rescue Hook and Ladder Company. Both of those companies had their headquarters in Old City Hall, which you know is our fire department, and the Fire Kings had theirs somewhere else. So this is the slide that you see here is 1915. That was the Maquoketa Firemen of 1915, and it was made up of men from these three different companies. Well, back to December's again. December 1915, December 4th to be exact, 1915, was the horrific fire. And December just holds the record for horrific fires. December after December after December, we had bad fires. The fire fiend, as they called it in the newspaper, struck again Saturday at 1:30 p.m., December 4th, and the entire Stevens building was destroyed by flames. This building housed now, the pictures that I'm going to show you were all taken by Hamley, photographer Hamley. And it's interesting because on each of his photographs, he wrote on them in white ink. You see, he wrote that on them. And those were his original photographs. But this is the next one. This is the same fire in 1915. The buildings that burned housed the post office, the Lane and Buckner furniture store and funeral parlor, and Dr. Ellis's dental parlors, the A.S. Butterworth newsstand, and the John Raff barbershop. But Arch Hamley was on the scene for this fire, and because of that, we have some really, really excellent pictures. And these were all taken by him. So this picture doesn't look so horrible. This is after the fact. But if you look up here, you see that part of the building is missing, and it's hard to tell, but the windows are all out. So this picture doesn't look quite so bad. I think Helen,
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Where would that be?
Okay, so it would be kind of where last fire was where the Hallmark store was in that area, kind of in that side of the block.
In the middle of the block.
In the middle of the block. Yeah, it was in the middle of the block. So I think Helen Feeney donated most of these family photos to us. It was in the 100 block of South Main Street. And Dr. Ellis's dentist and his dentist clinic was up above. Well, an easy way to tell, this is the Pastime Theater. So the old Pastime Theater. All of that was just completely destroyed. So this is another one of Hamley's photos, and this photo, you can see how much destruction. This is all completely gone. There's Lane and Buckner, and it was just really sad. And this is a picture of the inside. The brick walls stood up pretty well, but as you can see, the inside of the building was pretty well destroyed. That would be the Lane and Buckner furniture store and funeral parlor. So, okay. So 1917 marked a good day in our history in the winter, and in our firefighting history at least, and that's when the Fire Kings, that used to be the Hearst running team, remember, they had the first motorized fire truck. It's kind of a cute little fire truck, I think. But that was the very first fire truck that we had. And then 3 months later, the Barnes Hose Company got their fire truck. And there they are, all on their fire truck. And you can see old City Hall in the background, right? And then, not to be outdone, the last Hook and Ladder Company got their fire truck. And that one maybe looks even smaller than the rest. But all of a sudden, toward the beginning, well, this was toward the beginning of 1917, we had 3 actual fire trucks. Well, and this is all of them together, all 3 trucks lined up together. And again, Old City Hall. So this is my favorite picture of downtown Makoko, 1917. Look at the wonderful cars. Look at the businesses. What a busy, bustling town this was. And so 1917 again, right? Okay. Saturday, December 29th, 1917, 2:30 in the morning, the fire fiend struck again in the Boyd block, which is down here on Main Street. And the contents of most all the buildings were lost. It's thought to have started from an overheated stove in the Mission pool room. I think that is where the real Otto Reel's pool hall was. The damage reached $40,000. It doesn't sound like much to us now, but in 1917, that was a lot of money. It was 15 below zero. When the fire was discovered, it was already burning between the walls and too advanced to really be checked. The atmospheric conditions made the sound muffled. And so when they tried to sound the fire alarm, not many people, the sound didn't carry well. And people did not hear the city fire bells and the whistles. And so response to the fire was very slow. Again, the firemen had to, so you can see the icicles here. Again, the firemen had to contend with freezing water, solid hoses, where they would freeze solid in the hoses, and no water would even come out of the nozzle. Flying sparks going everywhere, igniting more blazes on contact, and falling timbers coming down from everywhere. They were often overcome by intense smoke, and they'd have to be revived. So they'd revive them right there on the street, and then they'd go back and fight the fire again. So as a precaution then, they cut the electricity off to that area, and the business industry was then in darkness. And the only light that they had to fight the fire until sun came up was the firemen's lanterns. So this is the next morning, and you see what they've had to contend with. And again, the American Pool Hall, and you can see, so you can see that this sign says Pool Hall, and on one of the windows it says 10 pins. So I guess that's how that they know that that was there. But again, a devastating, devastating fire. One of the things that happened was that their clothing would become wet, and then it would freeze almost instantly. And it was like they were encased in iron or something. They just couldn't move. And they would have to thaw them out before they could even move. But grateful citizens again came to the rescue. They joined in the fight. They brought hot coffee and they brought food to the exhausted and half-frozen firefighters. So it was a pretty sad scene. There's one of the street lights at that time had 3 bulbs, and you see they're almost completely covered. And here, names on the side. So when you look at the photos of this fire, December 1917, it's interesting. I can get to the next one. It's interesting when you look at the scene and you see this. And this is the old hand-pulled hook and ladder that they used to fight fires before they got the trucks. And so this is the end of the year. They have 3 new fire trucks, but none of the pictures show any of the fire trucks. So I don't know whether they just didn't use them or they just happened, to not be in the pictures or what. But kind of reminds you when we talked about the radio station and Sherry Melville was here and Tom Meserly, and she was talking about how frozen the firemen were and how they had to defrost them at our latest fire. Kind of reminds you of that. It's another shot of the same fire. You can see Payne's Cafe. You can see Payne's Cafe down here. The American Savings Bank. Everything was pretty well destroyed. But remember again that, I mean, we look at the businesses and the destruction is there, but a lot of these people, a lot of these merchants lived in their buildings. There were the upper floors and the back rooms. They were almost all apartments. And they had to rouse all the residents. Most of them were still sleeping because this one happened at 2:30 in the morning. And they had to get everybody out that they could. A lot of them suffered smoke inhalation, and they had to do all that when they were beginning to fight to save the adjoining buildings. The American Savings Bank was in great danger, and a lot of you remember that Dr. F.V. Johnson, his office was up here, and I'm not sure just which one, but his office was up above. His whole family lived up there. That was Dr. Frank's father-in-law. And everybody worked really hard. You know, all the people that came to volunteer to help out, they went to the medical office and they tried to evacuate and take out the people and then save the valuable medical instruments and the medicines that were in the doctor's office and get them all out of there and save them and take them to nearby buildings. So that was all part of what the citizens were doing as the 3 companies were trying to fight the fire. So it's really a very sad time, December 29, 1917. And then we have our wonderful Academy building. So this is I think the 3rd Academy building on Academy Hill where Maquoketa Middle School is today. Okay, this on East Locust Street, top of Olive Street, and as you can see, it was a really strong building. Brick construction. It was built in 1876, and it replaced the original building that was built in 1846. But I'd like you to look at the bell tower. See this? So up here hung the beautiful old bell, almost the size of the Liberty Bell. That bell is in our museum now. It's pretty neat. But just before we go on to look at the other pictures, look at how far that is. Okay? So, the Academy was destroyed by a mysterious fire on December 29th of 1921. And it's interesting to look at the records, the fire department records, which we have those also. The city firefighters were still those original 3 companies that we talked about. The Fire Kings, the Rescue Hook and Ladder, and the Barn Hose Company. Those are the men that were fighting this fire. But this is the beautiful building that you just saw in the other thing. The tower fell, and the old bell that was hanging in the tower fell 3 stories and into the bell tower, and then through 3 stories and into the basement. And it amazes me that at that time there were high school, junior high, and elementary children going to school in that building. And it said that they all loved this old bell because it called them to school and it told them when school was out. And so they wanted to find the bell. So for 3 weeks, this fire kind of smoldered in the basement, right? And at the end of 3 weeks, they allowed the school children to go into the basement of this building and look for the bell. They looked for the bell for 3 weeks before they found it, because they expected, because it was heavy, it would fall straight down, but it didn't. Somehow it fell at an angle and was in a different part of the building. It was under 3 feet of brick when they found it. But they found it and they saved it. And these are just some pictures. So at that time, this part of the building was saved. This is the old part of the academy. This was for those of us who are old enough to have gone to school there, this was the Industrial Arts Building. And what else? Does anybody remember?
Home ec.
The Home Ec Building, okay, and Industrial Arts. And later on, there was a little glass connection there, a little building that you walk through to get from one to the other.
Right.
So, pretty sad pictures when you look at this and what happened to that beautiful building. I know that in reading the studies later of what happened to the building, they decided that it was a bunch of oily rags that combusted down in the corner of the basement by the boiler. But it would seem to me you'd have to have a lot of heat for that to happen, and this was December 29th, so, but that's what they said. That's what they eventually said had happened. And we have quite a few pictures of that old building, but it's just kind of haunting. And then it was rebuilt. New building was built, and it was open for classes on September 3rd of 1923. I don't think we could build a building in this day and age that quickly, but something that was amazing to me was so they were lucky because this was December 29th. It was Christmas vacation, so there were no kids in the school, no people in the school, and that was fortunate. But by the time school started again on January 2nd, they had made arrangements for every single class to have a place to meet. They all had a place to meet. They had arranged for supplies. They had books. They had supplies, and school went on just like this had never happened. School went on. And I thought that was really remarkable too. When they opened this building in 1923, they were using all 3 floors. The high school was on the 2 lower floors, right? The second floor was used for the junior college. And the junior college was there from 1927 to 1943, when it had to close because of the war. There were so many men that were called in to serve it in the war, World War II, that they couldn't continue operating the school, so the college closed. But there were elementary school kids, there were high school kids, and there was the junior college. And so the building was well used. And if you go in that building today and you walk down, I think they're granite stairs in the back. They're interesting because they have dips, you know. from the wear of so many people, some of us, going up and down those stairs and up and down those stairs. So it was just an interesting time. But just another December catastrophe that happened. So then time went along again, and then we had the First Baptist Church. And probably most of us don't remember that building. But it was a beautiful church, and it was where the fire department is today. That helps you remember. Okay. I do remember when they held their meetings in the Hearst House on West Platte Street, where Red Hinton lived for a while. I remember going to Bible school there when the church was there. So that was a long time ago. A very long time ago. Shouldn't be telling you these things. But anyway, that was a beautiful church. And again, December 21st, 1945, this church caught on fire. And again, it's the Baptist Church, it's Niagara Street, and the tragic fires just occurred in December. And then if you remember, and I know some of you have been thinking, our most recent fire in 2008 that burned where the green space is now, that burned, a quarter of our downtown pretty much. That wasn't December, but it was January 19th. So it didn't miss December by very far. But so many similarities between the 1917 fire and this fire in 2008. The cold temperatures, the water freezing, the things that they had to deal with, the cold, and it was just a sad thing. But one more picture of the fire. But as I said, I was really looking for happy stories in December, but I didn't really find many happy stories. So I just remember when Ray Scott gave a program a while back, and he was talking about Christmas in the Baldwin area, and he was talking about the man that put all of the Christmas decorations up in Eden Valley. Do you remember that? It's talking about Eden Valley and the beautiful Christmas decorations over there. I don't remember seeing those, but a lot of people did. So that was kind of one happy story. And then I just remember sleigh riding and ice skating. How many people ice skated at a horseshoe pond? Yeah, but ice skated, right? Yeah. So there were a lot of happy things, but those things didn't make the news. So when you go back to look in the history books, those things just didn't show up. So I just thought so we could end on a happy note, like I said. If anybody has any remembrance of happy things that happened in December, it would be good to hear about those. Not just the bad fires. And the fact that we had no more deer in Iowa, that's changed again, right? But we had no deer for a long time.
Going back to the deer, I heard that same thing, but it said that the deer that survived were the ones that went to the cattle yards.
Yes.
By the barns, and that's what kept them.
So did the wolves not attack the cattle? I didn't understand how that worked, but you're right. I did that before. But they hid among the cattle, and then the wolves didn't.
And it could be that they have donkeys or mules in there too, and they would keep the wolves away.
Keep the wolves away.
They had those in by the cows.
Maybe there were enough deer that they could get at that they didn't need to pursue them.
And that's true. That's true too. That they didn't have to go there. Roger.
We had an ice storm last Saturday, but I remember as a kid a terrible ice storm that we had, and the men, I was just a little boy, and I remember the men had cleats they put on their shoes. Do you remember that at all? Anybody? It was a terrible ice storm.
I guess I've never understood. We always read about kids walking to country school and how there'd be so much snow and then it would crust over on the top. and then they'd walk across the snow, walk right over the fences and things like that. I always thought that was amazing, but they even took sleighs and things over. That had to be really hard to drive a sleigh over. That's,
I have a remembrance, not necessarily happy, but
okay.
as a kid growing up, not too far from his house, I remember getting off the school bus, this was kindergarten,
Okay,
walking along over the fence, tops of the fence posts in drifts, hard, and breaking through and over my head,
and going all the way down.
going all the way down.
Oh,
And luckily, my three sisters liked me well enough to rescue me out of that. But I can remember falling through
That
that.
was like,
oh, that would be scary.
pretty.
Yeah, my mother used to tell me about this one, there was a sledding accident back in the 40s where she said that the snow was real deep and anyway, he had gotten killed on the sled, you know.
Yes.
Before you leave the fire, is there
My sons always call me during Broadband lunch. I think that's on purpose.
given all the fires in December, is there a working theory as to why December was so tragic, dangerous?
I've not seen it, unless people are trying so hard to keep warm that they're using stoves, overheating their stoves and that sort of thing. Nancy?
Even now, though, if it's a really cold night, that's when the fires happen, is because furnaces are working so hard.
So hard to keep.
But, every once in a while, there'll be that, on a very cold night, there'll be a fire.
I guess it just,
I think it's just the furnaces.
I guess.
Our
It just
Our
stuns me.
Decembers have changed, It's more like that was, what they experienced was more like what we would get in January now.
That's true.
And that's
So,
probably true too.
It's how things have changed.
Have changed a little
Climate change
bit.
and that.
I was just.
And a little obscure thing, and then I'll be quiet.
No, you're good.
When you were talking earlier on that early firefighters used water from cisterns.
Yes,
Well, my head went to businesses had cisterns.
yes.
How did they fill them? And I went online,
Okay, good.
and they designed the roofs to collect water and channel it down into the cistern. I didn't know that.
And when there hadn't been very much rain, the cisterns were empty, and then when there was a fire, there was no water to fight the fire.
They just said that in the 1800s, that's what they did.
Did.
The roofs channel the water into the
Into the
cistern.
system. Yeah. So, thank you. Thank you. And just really happy December stories. One really happy story.
I have a funny one.
Okay,
And
we
it has
need a
nothing
funny
to
one.
do with the weather.
Okay.
But when I was growing up, the kids slept upstairs, Mom and Dad were downstairs. And somebody would always go down and, like they're gonna go to the bathroom, but they'd peek and, come back up and report on what was under the
Christmas
Christmas
Eve?
tree.
Okay.
Yeah, Christmas morning. And one morning, my brother went down, he came back up and he said, "There's nothing under the Christmas tree, no presents." So we got very worried about that. As soon as we thought we could get away with it, we woke Mom and Dad up and said, "There's no presents under the tree." And my parents said, "Well, go look in our closet. We heard a lot of thumping and bumping last night." They didn't get the presents out in time, or forgot or something. We totally bought it. Thought, that's weird, but Santa left all our presents in Mom and Dad's closet.
That is funny. There reminds me, so Santa Claus came to my house last Saturday, and he brought this little puppy for my little granddaughter Shyla, who a lot of you know. And so Shyla said, he said there was a little note with a puppy, and it said, it was from Santa, and it said this puppy had been so bad, he was chewing up all the toys in Santa's workshop, so Santa had to bring him early. So she was happy. So when you see Shyla, that's the story. That's funny. All right. Any more stories before we go? Well, I hope everybody has a wonderful Christmas, a happy New Year. Good luck to everybody. Les?
Thank you to you for throwing a good program together.
Yes.
Well, thank you. That's my thing. Thank you. wonderful, wonderful Christmas, everybody.
You too.
Thank you.